biggest success stories coming out of the year, not just from an animated perspective, but simply from a film perspective, is the release of Sony Animation's K-Pop Demon Hunters. There's no doubt it's become one of the biggest hits of the year and has taken the world by storm. It came out in late June and was an instant superstar sensation. There are probably a wealth of reasons as to why it's done so well. Accessibility by being on the biggest streamer, the fact that it's a masterstroke in planning which serviced an undertapped market and engaged with pop culture in a way that felt current, fresh, and not cringeworthy. It has a very catchy soundtrack which helped to build up even more momentum. And then of course there's the simple fact that it's just a really good film. It's a complete breath of fresh air, and yet even still, it's probably been more successful than anybody could have possibly expected. When it first released, it was only like 2 days out from the end of the recording week for Netflix to gather up its data, and yet it still managed to come in second on the charts. This success has not let up, not even a little bit. The next week, surprise surprise, it reached the top of the charts as the most watched film on the platform. The week after that, it fell to second place with the release of The Old Guard 2, but then it bounced back to take the top spot for 2 more weeks. It then fell to second with Happy Gilmore 2, which continued on for another week. Then it remained in second in competition with new release My Oxford Year, whilst Happy Gilmore actually started declining, went to third instead. Then for 3 weeks after that, it regained the top spot again. So that's 11 weeks so far in the Netflix top 10, which to be fair is still far from the record, and yet it's already become the most viewed Netflix movie ever in that time. It also hasn't really shown any signs of declining as of writing this. The most recent week's data has it in the top spot with 30 million views for the week. 30 million! Huge numbers that you'd associate with a film's debut, and yet it keeps chugging along with nothing slowing it down. Sometimes you see a film stay in the top 10 for ages, but it's only hanging on by a little. For reference, with the latest week's data, the only competition that K-Pop Demon Hunters has is a new release with Thursday Murder Club. Everything else is under 10 million views for the week, so I do not see it falling off anytime soon, and I don't see it dropping out of the Netflix top 10 for the foreseeable future. Simply put, it's become a juggernaut. So many other films have been released onto the platform in that time, and yet it's outlasting them all. Hell, it even came out in cinemas for that sing-along version, and I'm pretty sure it did very well for itself there too. I think it was the most successful cinematic release for the platform, who don't usually do that sort of thing at all, although it's hard to gauge how well it did there since they don't really report their numbers at the box office. I still think that it's massively impressive though, given that I would say that the majority of people going to see the sing-along version in cinemas already saw the movie as part of their Netflix subscription, but now they're willing to go and see it in the cinema for additional money. I don't think that many films would actually be able to pull that sort of interest from a fan base, that's for sure. Anyway, as I said though, the film has ended up the most watched movie on Netflix if you look at their top 10 charts. It's gotten monster numbers. I think that Netflix tracks the record through the first 91 days after a film's been released. Why do they do it like that? I don't know, but that's what it says on their statistics page, and so that's what we're going to go with. As of writing this, it's already in that top spot, and yet it's only been out for 78 days or so. It still has more left in the tank, but it's already 36 million views above the nearest contender in Red Notice at a whopping 266 million views. On top of that, it has an insane 443 million hours watched. It's released in June, and it's just casually posting 50,000 years worth of watch time. It is simply absurd to think about how popular it's gotten in such a short span of time. History is being made right before our eyes. Of course, in the wake of the release, I did expect they'd make a sequel film at some point. After all, it was very popular, and both Sony and Netflix would probably want to ride the wave, so to speak. Why wouldn't you? After all, from what we've seen, this era of animation seems to be very risk-averse and plays to known franchises, as that's all the audience really seems to be willing to go and see. Therefore, the fact that they've been able to succeed in making a brand new IP this successful is no small feat. Even if they'd only had half the success they've had, I would have viewed it as a very obvious sequel bait. Anybody that thought otherwise is a delusional fool who is allergic to money. Of course, this is all from before the massively overwhelming success. I think it had only been out for like a handful of weeks when I was making that speculation, and it was a long way away from being considered the most successful film that Netflix has ever made. Now, with all that new information that we've just discussed in mind, you wouldn't just be stupid for not thinking that there should be a sequel film in the works. You'd have to be complete gibbering incompetent. If they never followed up on it, then everybody involved should be fired and blacklisted for the crime of being stupid. However, that's not the reality we're facing because, well, the powers that be are not actually that stupid, and they can smell the money a mile away. They're going to milk this franchise for all it's worth, and with good reason. Part of me was actually curious as to whether they'd ever consider having a proper cinematic release before releasing on Netflix. However, considering the huge numbers that it's pulled now, I expect that they are going to want to mostly keep it Netflix exclusive because I'm fairly certain it would pull in lapsed subscribers. Yeah, I actually took a closer look, and apparently Sony has the exclusive rights to produce further films in this franchise, but at the same time, they're going to be Netflix exclusives. It would be up to Netflix if they wanted to put it in the cinemas. I suppose there is a chance that they just have a limited run though to get into the Oscar race. Is that something they have to do to qualify? Is that why they ended up doing a brief cinema run for this one too? Because it was so acclaimed that they realised they wanted to put it in cinemas so it can challenge for awards? So yeah, from what I've seen, Netflix has never done a full cinematic release, and I doubt they're going to be suddenly changing their stance on that, although a limited run is all but a certainty. However, if there is any film that could potentially change their tune, I would expect it to be a sequel to the most viewed film that's ever been made for their platform by a significant margin. Anyway, in the immediate aftermath of the film's release, the director and producers and whatnot, they all played coy about whether there was going to be any sort of continuation. It was made clear that there was certainly an appetite to return to the world and a lot of unexplored story points that could anchor a film, but they obviously wouldn't be committing to anything. We've talked about those potential storylines in a couple of different videos, but apparently the directors have also expressed interest in exploring the backstories of Mira and Zoe, which should be fun, although, to be honest, Rumi still has a crazy untapped backstory too with the whole, demon father thing she's got going on. Maybe some exploration of that too, please. Plus, all of that love interest guy totally not being fully dead. Like, you cannot tell me that's the actual ending to his character. Absolutely no chance. So I expected that we would be getting news of a sequel off the back of this, and indeed, that's what we're getting. When? Who knows? Because it seems that they actually want to put in the time and effort to make a good film, rather than rush the project and end up with some generic slop. The chairman for Netflix Films quite literally said something along those lines, that they're excited to explore what could be the next adventure for Huntrix. KPop Demon Hunters' success comes from its original fresh story, so if we do embark on a sequel, we want to take our time to make sure that any future stories we tell with our favourite Demon Hunters retains the flair and uniqueness of the first film. That's a whole lot of words, and honestly, they could all be BS. They might not actually care about any of the creative and artistic integrity, and we're just looking to fill out words of a press release that makes it seem like they're developing high art. That's certainly a potential way to view it, especially for the more jaded and cynical amongst us. However, I think I'm going to try to be a bit more optimistic about things. I'm going to choose to believe that they mean what they say, and they actually want the film to be high quality and maintain the feel of the first one. Then again, when you think about it, considering that today's audience for animated films seems to be more and more discerning with their time and money, they probably do have that fear that if they serve up something subpar, the audience is going to be more willing to not watch it on repeat like they did with the first one, and word of mouth could damage its long-term prospects. So from a purely pragmatic perspective, it's better to not rush things and ensure that they go in the right creative direction. On top of that, they're in negotiations with both of the directors to come back and work on a potential sequel. The fact that they want to bring back the original creative team, it's simply another good sign. Now that's all we know for sure. As in, that's all that's actually been confirmed, but at the same time, there have been other industry rumours that have been floating around that suggest that they want to take this further than a simple sequel. For starters, I've seen talk of the idea of there being a full-on franchise, at least 2 additional sequels to follow up from the original. Yeah, to me, this seemed like a given, even with the initial 3-week success from when I was first talking about the movie and where they could go with it. It feels like creatively there's a lot of wiggle room in terms of what they can actually do, and lots of different pathways they could follow simply from the unanswered questions of the first one. We've already spitballed a few creative directions they could go in, but even that's just for the mainline movies. If they really wanted to, they could very easily be able to go in the direction of spin-off films as well. Well, maybe not spin-offs that follow minor characters, but you could easily do some sort of prequel story at the very least. And I'm not talking about a sequel that has flashbacks, but a full prequel. Maybe a film that follows the story of the generation of demon hunters that came before that included Rumi's mum. Maybe a film that follows how Huntrix first got together and goes in depth on their backstories and why they decided to become demon hunters in the first place. That might be a lot of fun too. However, those aren't the only future projects I've seen rumours about. There's been talk about a short film, which I'm not really sure on. Not that I wouldn't want them to make something like this, but I just don't know what you'd really do with it. How long would it be? 10 minutes? 20? A comedy adventure type thing? Maybe something like Tangled Ever After? A little post-canon adventure perhaps? Maybe something following those demon animal things. They're still around, right? Something like that might be fun. There's also been talk about a potential television show, which has me very intrigued. There's a lot of potential story you can follow up in, but a show probably requires a more significant investment in terms of its narrative. After all, they usually have a much longer runtime. Also, by the nature of what this franchise is and how it's distributed, it does feel like it would be much harder to brush this type of show off to the side and give it some weird, non-canon status, right? After all, with stuff like the DreamWorks shows that go along with the main films, there's always that clear differentiation. The films were coming out in the cinema in much higher quality and never ever referenced the different events taking place in the TV shows. However, at the same time, the shows were referencing the movies, and thus they presented a sort of alternate canon, where the films were canon to the show and everything was shaped around making them work together as a cohesive whole, but the shows were not canon to the movies. However, the difference in platform and budget created that clear distinction within the minds of the audience, and it's probably dead obvious that something like Kung Fu Panda the Dragon Knight or the DreamWorks Dragon shows aren't going to be on the same level of the films, and they're not going to get the same viewership. That being said, I'm not sure you could say the same for this franchise. KPop Demon Hunters lives on Netflix, and so I think it would be much harder to create that distinction between the show and the movie. Therefore, if you prioritize one over the other, I think it has a bigger chance of actively damaging the brand overall. Thus, you can't really treat a show like The Forgotten Stepchild and slash the budget with a wonky plot that's never addressed within the films. Because ultimately, it's all a Netflix franchise, and so it's all as accessible as the other. It's all connected. That being said, I think the best way to handle this is by making a prequel show, and I know I'm pitching a lot of prequels right now, but it just works in this context. I mean, didn't they quite literally have a world tour just before the start of the film? Maybe you could have some sort of comedy show that centers around those hijinks as they go around the world performing and killing demons. Just a thought. Then finally, there's talk of a stage musical. Hell yes! Give me a one-to-one adaptation of the movie to the stage with some extra songs peppered in, and you have a recipe for mega success. Although rest in peace to the poor soul that'd have to sing Golden every night. That surely cannot be a very easy song to sing, though it's not like I know much about that sort of thing to begin with, and I could be straight up talking out my ass. Really, I'm just hyped that this franchise is well and truly kicking off. I don't care if it takes a couple of years. This is something new, fresh, and exciting. I'm invested, and I'm in it for the long haul. With all that being said though, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of all these potential continuations of the franchise? Are you on board with them? Maybe not. I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.